These houses and the gardens that surround them are in the little village of Llanddinam, a small village a few miles south and west of Newtown in Powys. Llanddinam has several times won the Best Kept Village in Wales award. It is a lovely place set in a beautiful fertile valley. To me, one of the most interesting objects here is the Parish Church, because unlike most churches which are built on an east-west axis, Llanddinam Parish Church is built on a north-south axis, possibly because this ridge was the only bit of level ground that the builders could find up above the floods. The church was built around about the 1400s, but inside it there is a font that looks as though it is much older. And of course it would not be the first time that a church has been built on the foundations of a much older building. On the wall there is a wooden panel, rather crudely carved, but dating from the 17th century. It depicts the four beasts of Revelation, a lion, a man, an ox, and an eagle, and in the center is a panel showing Adam and Eve, who appear to have been rather busy with their fig leaves, and between them a human-headed serpent tempting them to the first sin. Many churches have stained glass windows depicting events from local or church history, but Llanddinam Parish Church has stained glass windows depicting what I might call church mythology. One of the panels shows the marriage of Cresca and Pudens. A second shows St. Paul preaching to Caractacus and his father Bran the Blessed. Both events, I might add, highly speculative. And a third panel shows Christians mopping up the blood of martyrs in Rome. Here, by the side of a busy and noisy main road, is a statue to Llanddinam's most famous son, David Davies, industrialist, philanthropist, and proof that virtue does bring its own reward. But to tell his story, let's go somewhere a bit quieter, to the railway line which he built. Young David Davies started out in life as a sawyer. That means he cut up logs for a living. He would buy a log for about £8, and then he would saw it up into planks and other pieces of timber, which he could sell for £50. But then, this railway line, which has long since fallen victim to Dr. Beeching's axe, was being built. And David Davies saw his chance to make his fortune. There was a great need of labourers to work on the railway line, and he became an employment agency, getting in farm labourers from the farms and around this district and supplying them to the railway company. And of course he received a percentage of their wages. But, and this is the important point, he was an honest employment agency. He looked after his men. He cared for them when they were sick. He made sure that they were paid off properly when work finished or when they finished work. And generally speaking, he won the high regard of his men. By the time the railway had finished being built, David Davies had a substantial fortune in his pocket. But he wanted more. He needed another job that would see him through for the rest of his life. And so he cast about him for something that he could do. Well, in those days, a coal mine was the equivalent these days of having an oil well. It was the Industrial Revolution, you know, and steam was the motive source of power. And so David Davies determined to look for coal. And he gathered together a gang of workmen, maybe some of the ex-railway employees that he had been using, and he set off down into South Wales to look for coal. He headed down to the Rhondda, and there he set his men to work looking for coal. For weeks they scoured the sides of the valley, looking for indications of black gold, without luck. They dug here, they dug there, and all the while their wages were eating into the fortune that David Davies had built up, because although it was a fortune to him in absolute terms, it wasn't really all that much money. And finally, the day came when he had no more money, and still coal had not been found. Reluctantly, he called his men about him and made an official announcement. I've got no more money. I can't pay you any more. I had hoped to make my fortune to provide you all with jobs for life, but I'm sorry, the dream has not worked out. Well, David Davies mounted his horse and rode away. But the men gathered together. They realized that they had been treated fairly, more than fairly, by David Davies, and they were determined to repay his kindness. They held an impromptu meeting, and they agreed that they would work for one more week without wages. And so they did. And for one more week, under his guidance, they carried on the search. And at the very end of that week, they found what they were looking for. Coal. Vast quantities of coal near Treorchi. The Rhondda coal, the most rich coal field in virtually the whole of Wales. David Davies fought a number of battles for his wealth. For example, when Lord Bute, who owned the Cardiff docks, kept raising the prices of the use of the docks to extortionate levels, David Davies fought a battle to get a bill through Parliament to enable him to build the docks at Barry, and eventually he had the pleasure of seeing Barry docks become bigger and more prosperous than Cardiff docks. But throughout his wealth, he never forgot the town from which he came. This bridge dates from 1848 and may well have been built by David Davies. In later years, he brought gas and electricity to his village. And when he died at the age of 72, his townsfolk, the people here who remembered his many acts of kindness, erected a statue in his memory. Proof, you see, that virtue does bring its own reward. Or as Jesus put it in the Golden Rule, what you would that men should do to you, do the same thing to them. It works, as David Davies found out.